Marisol Estela Alba was born on December 8, 1992, in the modest town of Cajamarca, nestled in the Cajamarca region of Peru. Life there was simple, grounded in tradition and family. As the eldest of 5 children born to Domingo Estela and Zita Alba, Marisol carried the kind of quiet responsibility that only firstborns often understand. She wasn't just a big sister, she was a protector, a caretaker, a second mother. Her siblings looked up to her, not only because of her kind and nurturing nature, but because she always seemed to know what to do. From a young age, Marisol stood out. While other children dreamed of play and escape, she dreamed of purpose. Her goals were never just about personal success, they were tied to her family. She wanted to rise, yes, but only so she could lift others with her. She often told her mother that one day she would have a career, a good life, and a house of her own. More importantly, she said, "I'll bring you all with me." That was the kind of love Marisol carried. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was deep and enduring. By the time Marisol turned 15, she had finished primary school, a major achievement for many girls in her area. But she wasn't content with stopping there. The capital city of Lima, more than 500 miles away, called to her. Lima meant opportunity. It meant higher education. It meant that maybe, just maybe, she could become a nurse, the profession she had quietly dreamed about, while tending to her younger siblings' scraped knees and coughs. With her family's blessing and the bittersweet tears of her mother, Marisol boarded a bus to Lima. The journey was long and unfamiliar, but she kept her gaze forward. She arrived in the sprawling, chaotic city with little more than a suitcase and a heart full of ambition. She worked hard to finish high school and enrolled in a technical nursing program soon after. But Lima wasn't easy. Rent was expensive. Jobs were hard to find. Still, Marisol pressed on. She found work at a local bakery, early mornings, low pay, long hours. But it helped her afford a small rented room. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Her younger sister Rose eventually joined her in Lima and may have even stayed with her for a while, providing both comfort and companionship in an otherwise lonely new world. The 2 young women navigated city life together, bonded not just by blood, but by their shared dreams of something greater. Life in Lima was beginning to find a rhythm. Marisol woke early for work, attended her nursing classes in the afternoon, and returned to her room at night to study or rest. She was focused, grounded, and driven. But even in this new life of purpose and hard work, there was space for companionship. At the bakery, she became acquainted with Luis Gennaro Estes Rodriguez, the son of the bakery's owners. Luis was a man of routine, 10 years her senior, and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to command, fitting, given his position as a non-commissioned officer in the Peruvian army. He worked alongside his parents, helping manage the shop and delivery operations. To Marisol, he seemed mature, calm, and kind. His family quickly warmed to her, especially his mother, who admired Marisol's humility and determination. She was respectful, never complained, and treated her work with seriousness. Over time, a quiet affection began to form between Marisol and Luis. Friendly chats turned into longer conversations. Glances turned into invitations. By early 2012, they were officially a couple. Marisol was just 19. Luis was 29. Despite the age gap and differing life experiences, she believed she had found someone who admired her strength and independence. But she had no way of knowing that what Luis felt wasn't love. It was control. Luis's charm was fleeting. The relationship, barely out of its honeymoon phase, quickly soured. He became possessive and controlling. What Marisol initially interpreted as concern slowly morphed into suffocation. Luis wanted to know where she was at all times. He insisted she stop talking to male classmates. He questioned her about every interaction, every outing. It didn't stop there. He began sabotaging her plans, making up lies to manipulate her. If Marisol tried to return home to visit her family, he would stage emergencies. Once he claimed his car had been stolen. Another time, he pretended he had been kidnapped. Anything to keep her from leaving his sight. In a disturbing move, he began taking her clothes, literally removing them from her room, so she couldn't leave. He'd go through her phone, delete contacts, and accuse her of infidelity. When she tried to resist, he'd apologize the next day, swearing it was because he loved her too much. It was the beginning of a dangerous psychological trap. To outsiders, Luis still appeared functional, polite, well-groomed, disciplined. But inside the walls of Marisol's rented room, he was a ticking bomb. Marisol, perhaps too hopeful, too trusting, believed he might change. That her patience would soften him. But she was slowly losing herself, her friendships, and most painfully, her family. Luis's behavior escalated. His obsession with Marisol became all-consuming. He followed her to school, waited for her outside classrooms, and harassed her classmates. Teachers began to notice and grew concerned, but Marisol, fearing retaliation, remained silent. The emotional and physical abuse intensified. Luis slapped her during arguments, dragged her by the arm when she tried to walk away. He'd scream that if she ever left him, he would kill her, and then himself. These threats weren't said in passing. They were deliberate, venomous declarations made to control her through fear. By this time, Luis had moved into Marisol's room. She had allowed him to stay temporarily during a difficult time, but he never left. He established dominance over her space, turning her sanctuary into a prison. Any contact with friends or family required negotiation, and even then he often blocked it. Friends started drifting away. Her once frequent calls to her mother became rare. She stopped posting on social media. She smiled less. The woman who once brimmed with purpose and affection was slowly being consumed by a man who didn't love her, but who believed she belonged to him. What began as a relationship had mutated into an imprisonment of the soul. And while those around her suspected something was wrong, no one fully understood the silent hell Marisol was enduring every single day. By early 2013, Marisol had become a ghost of her former self. She had stopped attending her nursing courses regularly. Friends and classmates noticed her absence and began to whisper among themselves, "Where's Marisol?" But no one seemed to know for certain. Even her professors grew worried. Her once impressive academic performance had sharply declined. Her family in Cajamarca, especially her mother Zita and younger sister Rose, felt the distance deeply. Marisol no longer called as often. When she did, her voice was distant, careful, almost rehearsed. Gone were the warm, hopeful tones that once defined her. When Zita asked if everything was okay, Marisol always said yes, but the pauses between words, the tension behind her polite responses, spoke a different truth. Then, the phone calls stopped altogether. Marisol vanished from social media. Even Rose, who had once shared the same cramped living space with her, couldn't reach her. Panic slowly crept into the family's hearts. In April 2013, Zita received a sudden call from Luis. He sounded calm, even cheerful. He told her that Marisol had traveled to the jungle for a job opportunity in a hospital. He said it was far from Lima and the connection was weak, so she couldn't call. He said she'd be back soon. Zita wanted to believe him, but something about the explanation didn't sit right. It felt like a story crafted too neatly. And in her heart, she knew her daughter would never leave without telling her. Not Marisol. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Marisol, Zita's unease hardened into fear. She traveled to Lima herself, accompanied by a cousin, determined to find her daughter. They visited Marisol's old apartment complex, asked neighbors, knocked on doors. Some had seen her in passing. Others said Luis had been around, but no one knew where she had gone. Zita went to the local police station and filed a missing persons report. At first, the authorities treated it like a routine case. Young adults leave without telling people all the time, they said. But Zita insisted this was different. Her daughter wasn't impulsive or reckless. She was structured, responsible. She wouldn't disappear without telling someone. Zita tried to contact Luis again. This time he was evasive. He said Marisol had moved. He claimed they had broken up. Then, in a contradictory turn, he said she was working far away. His stories shifted constantly. Zita searched hospitals, clinics, even morgues. She visited the National Registry to check if Marisol had recently signed any documents. Nothing. It was like her daughter had vanished from the earth. Still, she refused to give up. She stayed in Lima for months, working odd jobs while continuing her search. She posted flyers, visited churches, asked around in markets. And every night, she prayed that her daughter was still alive. In September 2013, 5 months after Marisol was last seen, Zita received an anonymous tip from a woman who claimed she had heard screaming in Marisol's building on the night she vanished. The caller said she believed something terrible had happened, but she had been too afraid to speak up. That same month, Marisol's old landlord contacted the police to report that the apartment, which Luis had continued renting under her name, had been vacated. The man had stopped paying rent and disappeared. Inside, the landlord found the room nearly empty, with walls stained and a mattress that looked burned. Luis, meanwhile, had vanished from public life. He had stopped showing up at the bakery and had even been suspended from his military post after failing to report for duty. The police finally began to take Zita's claims seriously. They reopened the investigation and labeled Marisol a missing person under suspicious circumstances. But the trail had already gone cold. Zita was left with unbearable silence, the gnawing ache of not knowing what had happened to her daughter. She still had no body, no final confirmation of what her heart already feared. That Marisol was dead. But Zita didn't stop. Her love wouldn't let her. She kept fighting, searching, pushing authorities to keep investigating, clinging to any sliver of hope or lead, however small. It was now October 2018, nearly 6 years into Marisol's turbulent and suffocating relationship with Luis Genaro Estes Rodriguez. Although she had broken things off months earlier, Luis continued to live in the same room, clinging to a false sense of control. He insisted on behaving as though nothing had changed. He monitored her every move, stalked her outside her classes, and flooded her phone with endless calls and messages. Marisol was trying to move on. She was finally beginning to reclaim fragments of her independence, although cautiously. That month, while passing through a busy district in Lima, she crossed paths with Jose Wilmer Vargas, a young man she had briefly dated 10 years earlier in 2008. The encounter was unplanned, the kind that feels like fate testing old memories. Wilmer greeted her warmly, surprised by how different she looked, older, yes, but more worn down. There was a tiredness in her smile. Still, they caught up over coffee. For a fleeting moment, Marisol felt the rush of familiarity and the comfort of being seen, really seen, without fear or obligation. Some sources would later suggest that this meeting reignited more than just a memory, that it sparked hopes for something new. Others said the encounter was innocent and brief. But whatever truly happened, one thing was clear. Luis found out. And the idea of Marisol even talking to another man seemed to awaken the darkest corners of his mind. On November 30th, 2018, a disturbing shift occurred. That day, Marisol's younger sister Rosemary received an unexpected voice message. It was from Marisol. In the recording, her voice was oddly flat, almost emotionless, completely unlike the cheerful tone her sister was used to. "I'm going to live with Wilmer in Warco," she said abruptly. "I'm traveling." The message didn't make sense. First, Marisol had never mentioned anything about leaving Lima or moving in with Wilmer. And second, Warco wasn't even a place she had ever spoken of. The whole thing felt off. Her phrasing, her tone, and the sudden nature of the announcement, it all felt wrong. Rosemary's instincts kicked in immediately. She called Marisol back. No answer. She texted her repeatedly. Nothing. Panic started to rise. The family was used to frequent check-ins. Days never passed without a call or at least a message. And yet now, silence. By December 1st, their mother and father in Cajamarca were desperate. Rosemary tried the only number she had left. Luis. At first, she refused. But as hours turned to days, she dialed. Luis answered casually, even claiming he hadn't seen Marisol. He said she had left and hadn't contacted him. But Rosemary could hear the tension in his voice. His version of events kept shifting. "You're lying," she told him directly. "She's with you, isn't she?" Luis denied it. "No," he said. "She left. I don't know where she went." But his lies were unraveling. When officers swarmed the building, he didn't run. He didn't resist. He looked them in the eyes and said quietly, "I was going to turn myself in." At the station, investigators confronted him with the evidence. Photos of the barrel. Text messages Marisol had sent to her sister. The witness who had seen Luis with Wilmer before her disappearance. Slowly the web unraveled. And Luis cracked. He confessed. He admitted to murdering Marisol on the night of November 30th, 2018, the same night she sent that strange message to her sister. He said it happened in the room they once shared. A heated argument, fueled by jealousy, rage, and obsession, turned deadly. What he said next chilled investigators to the bone. After strangling Marisol to death, Luis didn't panic. He didn't try to hide the body right away. He slept beside her corpse that night, as if she were still alive. It wasn't until the next morning, December 1st, that he bought materials to dispose of her, a large metal barrel, hydrochloric acid, lime, cement. He rented a forklift, transported the barrel to a vacant lot in Villa El Salvador, and buried her 3 meters deep. To the police, it was premeditated, calculated, cruel beyond belief. And yet, he kept insisting. "I loved her. I couldn't let her be with someone else." To Luis, Marisol was not a person. She was possession. And if he couldn't own her, no one could. Back in Cajamarca, Marisol's mother, Maruja, was inconsolable. Her daughter had left to chase a dream, an education, a life beyond poverty. And now she was being returned in a coffin. The image of her daughter trapped in that barrel haunted her. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She kept replaying old voicemails, Marisol's laughter, her stories about school, her dreams of becoming a language teacher. "I didn't even know she was dead," she sobbed to reporters. "We kept calling her. We prayed she had just gone off somewhere to think." But Marisol hadn't gone anywhere. And soon another twist would make everything clearer and darker. When the family managed to get in touch with Wilmer, the man Marisol allegedly left with, his response shocked them. Wilmer was confused and deeply concerned. "We were supposed to meet," he said, "but she never showed up." What he revealed next changed everything. A few days before Marisol vanished, he received frantic messages from her. She was begging him to meet, pleading to talk. The tone of her text seemed urgent, even desperate. They agreed to meet in a public park near a plaza. But when Wilmer arrived, it wasn't Marisol waiting for him. It was Luis. The moment was tense. Luis approached him and calmly said, "I know you're seeing her. But I'm going to fight for her. I don't care how things are. I'm going to win her back. She's going to be mine. She's my woman." Wilmer, shocked and cautious, backed away. He didn't want trouble. But after Marisol disappeared, the memory of that encounter became sinister. Luis hadn't come to plead or win anyone back. He had come to intimidate and assert ownership. And Wilmer's presence in Marisol's life, no matter how small, was a threat Luis wouldn't tolerate. Rosemary took all this in with growing dread. The stories didn't line up. Marisol had never gone to Warco. She never moved in with anyone. She never showed up for the meeting with Wilmer. Something was terribly wrong. That same day, the family went to the police to file an official missing persons report. But once again, the authorities dragged their feet, assuming Marisol would return on her own. That mistake would soon haunt everyone. On December 4, 2018, in a barren, desolate lot in Villa El Salvador, a district on the southern edge of Lima, a man walking home from work noticed something strange. A group of unfamiliar men were gathered around a forklift, digging what appeared to be a massive pit in the sand. They said it was for electrical work, but their accents weren't local. Their story felt rehearsed. The man, wary, warned them that kids played nearby and that such digging was dangerous. The group quickly abandoned the site and left. But what they left behind was far from innocent. Curious and unsettled, the man gathered a few neighbors. Together they began digging near the freshly disturbed sand. That's when they found the top of a barrel, metal, sealed, heavy. Near the site were acid containers, gloves, ropes, and other suspicious items. Realizing they may have uncovered something horrifying, the neighbors called the police. That night, firefighters and law enforcement worked for over 10 hours, using hand tools to extract the barrel, which had been buried more than 3 meters deep. The stench was unbearable, a nauseating chemical rot that clung to the air. By dawn on December 5th, the barrel was finally opened. Inside, they found layers of cement, lime, and acid. And beneath that, curled in a fetal position, was the body of a woman wearing the uniform of a local educational institute. Her body had already begun to decompose, but the white shirt bore the emblem of Marisol's school. A few hours later, her aunt confirmed it to the media. It was Marisol Alba. Her family collapsed under the weight of the news. The daughter they had spent years searching for had been buried like trash, entombed in acid and cement, by a man who once claimed to love her. December 6, 2018. The news of Marisol's murder sent shockwaves across Peru. Her image, bright-eyed, youthful, and full of promise, flashed across television screens and front pages. But behind the media frenzy, her family was living through a private kind of horror. Grief gave way to fury. They wanted justice. They wanted Luis Genaro Estes Rodriguez in handcuffs. And soon, they got their wish. Police located him hiding out in Villa Maria del Triunfo, just hours after Marisol's body was discovered. He wasn't in a panic. In fact, he was disturbingly calm. When officers swarmed the building, he didn't run, he didn't resist. He looked them in the eyes and said quietly, "I was going to turn myself in." At the station, investigators confronted him with the evidence. Photos of the barrel. Text messages Marisol had sent to her sister. The witness who had seen Luis with Wilmer before her disappearance. Slowly, the web unraveled. And Luis cracked. He confessed. He admitted to murdering Marisol on the night of November 30, 2018, the same night she sent that strange message to her sister. He said it happened in the room they once shared. A heated argument, fueled by jealousy, rage, and obsession, turned deadly. What he said next chilled investigators to the bone. After strangling Marisol to death, Luis didn't panic. He didn't try to hide the body right away. He slept beside her corpse that night, as if she were still alive. It wasn't until the next morning, December 1st, that he bought materials to dispose of her, a large metal barrel, hydrochloric acid, lime, cement. He rented a forklift, transported the barrel to a vacant lot in Villa El Salvador, and buried her 3 meters deep. To the police, it was premeditated. Calculated. Cruel beyond belief. And yet, he kept insisting, "I loved her. I couldn't let her be with someone else." To Luis, Marisol was not a person. She was possession. And if he couldn't own her, no one could. Back in Cajamarca, Marisol's mother, Maruja, was inconsolable. Her daughter had left to chase a dream, an education, a life beyond poverty, and now she was being returned in a coffin. The image of her daughter trapped in that barrel haunted her. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She kept replaying old voicemails. Marisol's laughter. Her stories about school. Her dreams of becoming a language teacher. "I didn't even know she was dead," she sobbed to reporters. "We kept calling her. We prayed she had just gone off somewhere to think." But Marisol hadn't gone anywhere. She had been silenced, erased, by a man they had once welcomed into their home. A man who, for years, controlled her like a shadow. Her father, Luis Alva, stood before the media just 2 days later. His voice was cracked but fierce. "This man destroyed my daughter. He lived with her. He watched her grow. And when she wanted to be free, he killed her like a dog. He begged the justice system not to let Luis go free. I don't want money. I don't want revenge. I want justice for every girl who thinks love means being controlled." The entire country was listening now. What made Marisol's murder hit so hard wasn't just the brutality. It was the barrel. That image. Her body folded inside a chemical-filled drum, buried underground, became a national wound. In Lima and beyond, women took to the streets carrying black barrels marked with her name. They chanted, "We are not yours to kill. Ni una más, not one more." Marisol's story had exposed a crisis Peru had long ignored, the epidemic of femicide, of women being murdered by partners, husbands, ex-boyfriends. In 2018 alone, over 150 women were killed in gender-based violence across the country. Marisol became a symbol, a face, a name, a life with dreams, taken too soon. The barrel wasn't just a hiding place. It was a coffin of control, a twisted monument to how far an obsessed man would go to silence a woman who simply wanted to live on her own terms. Artists began painting murals of Marisol, her smile, her books, her hopes, next to black barrels and roses. The message was clear: remember her. Not just how she died, but how she lived, and how society failed her. In January 2019, the formal criminal proceedings against Luis Genaro Estes Rodriguez began. The charge was clear: aggravated femicide with premeditation and cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession, the materials he purchased, the messages he faked, the lies he told. But Luis had hired a defense attorney who argued he was mentally unstable, that the murder had not been premeditated, and that his remorse should be taken into account. Marisol's family sat in the courtroom as Luis described the night of the murder without shedding a tear. Her sister Rosemary whispered, "He's not sorry, he's proud." The prosecutor demanded a 35-year prison sentence, arguing this wasn't a man who lost control in a moment of rage. This was a man who planned the erasure of a young woman's body, voice, and dreams. Women's rights groups filled the courtroom, holding signs that read, "Justicia para Marisol. Femicidio es terrorismo." And outside the courthouse, black barrels were once again stacked in silent protest. This time, not as symbols of death, but of memory. Because no matter how long Luis would spend behind bars, Marisol's family knew the sentence would never be enough. Their daughter's light had been extinguished. But they had made a vow. Her story would never be buried again. June 2019, Lima, Peru. The courtroom was still. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber as he prepared to deliver the verdict. Marisol's family sat on the front bench, holding hands, their faces drawn with exhaustion and grief. The months since Marisol's body had been found were a blur of pain, protests, and public mourning. They had relived her death every single day. And now, they were here, waiting for justice. Luis Genaro Estes Rodriguez stood tall, expression unreadable. He wore a crisp shirt, the same coldness in his eyes he had always worn when speaking about Marisol. As if she was still a possession, not a person. The judge began, This court finds the defendant guilty of the crime of aggravated femicide, committed with cruelty, premeditation, and intent to erase the victim's identity, body, and dignity. Gasps rang out. A sob broke in the corner. Luis was sentenced to 28 years in prison, the maximum allowed by law given the legal guidelines and his confession. Some cheered, others wept. But for Marisol's mother, Maruja, it wasn't enough. 28 years is nothing compared to what he did. He buried her alive in our hearts. Still, justice, however flawed, had been served. Marisol's name had been heard. Her story had not been silenced. The impact of Marisol's murder didn't fade after the trial. If anything, it intensified. Her story had pierced something deep in the national psyche. In the months that followed, Peru saw a surge of activism, especially from young women. Students, teachers, workers, all standing in solidarity with victims of femicide. Women marched through the streets of Lima, Cusco, Arequipa, and Cajamarca with black signs bearing the names of hundreds of murdered women. At the heart of it all was Marisol. Her story had a face, a body, a voice, and it could have been anyone's sister, daughter, friend. That's what made it unforgettable. In schools and universities, teachers used her case to open conversations about domestic abuse, control, emotional manipulation, and gender violence. One university even created a scholarship in her name, the Marisol Alba Memorial Grant, to support women from rural areas seeking to study education and language, just as she had dreamed. Her story, once buried in a barrel, was now on posters, in classrooms, in the law books being rewritten to protect others. Marisol's mother, Maruja, refused to disappear into mourning. In the aftermath of the trial, she became a quiet but forceful voice in the movement against gender-based violence. She traveled across Peru, speaking in rural villages, in schoolhouses, in church halls, telling her daughter's story. Her voice trembled, but her message was unshakable. If it happened to my daughter, it can happen to yours. We have to protect our girls, and we have to teach our boys what love is and what it isn't. Maruja worked with non-profit organizations to create support centers for abused women in Cajamarca. She called them Refugios de Marisol, Marisol's shelters. Each center offered therapy, legal aid, and housing for women trying to escape abusive relationships. The idea was simple. Give them a place to run before it's too late. In interviews, Maruja often said she still felt Marisol with her. When she saw young women learning to defend themselves. When she saw a mother hugging her daughter after a rally. She walks with me, she said. She didn't die in vain. Years have passed. The headlines faded. But Marisol Alba's story endures. Because it's not just hers. It's the story of every woman who's been loved too dangerously, controlled too silently, and buried too soon. Her name lives on, in murals, in protests, in whispered prayers, and shouted slogans. She is remembered in classrooms and courtrooms, in the black barrels that once symbolized death but now represent defiance. In Villa El Salvador, where she was buried, activists planted a garden on the lot where she was found. Roses grow there now, surrounding a plaque that reads, Aquí florece la memoria de Marisol. Que ninguna mujer más muera por amar. Here blooms the memory of Marisol. May no woman die again for loving. The story of Marisol Alba does not end with a barrel, a verdict, or even justice. It ends with a promise that she will not be forgotten, and that her death will keep others alive.